My parents failed me. They chose their sleep over me and left me permanently disabled. AITA for cutting off ties? Growing up, I always considered my parents to be truly wonderful. They were attentive, caring, and provided for me and my siblings in every way. However, they had one strict rule. Their phones went on Do Not Disturb from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. each night. They explained it as a way to maintain their free time and uninterrupted sleep, which they believed was essential. While we initially accepted this boundary, things changed when I found myself in a situation where I desperately needed them. About 3 years ago, when I was 18, I started working a late shift as a server, often finishing around 1 a.m. and then driving myself home. Unfortunately, one night after work, I was involved in a serious car accident. I sustained severe injuries that will never fully heal, and as a result, I now live with permanent disabilities. In that terrifying moment, lying in pain, all I wanted was to hear my parents' comforting voices. I called their phones, hoping against hope that just this once, they might answer despite the Do Not Disturb rule. But, as expected, my calls went straight to voicemail. My heart sank as I realized they wouldn't be there for me. Desperate, I reached out to other family members, hoping someone could contact my parents or come to the hospital to be with me. My grandparents responded immediately, driving through the night to be by my side, despite the hour. They even tried calling my parents, but they were unable to reach them either. My parents remained entirely out of reach until the following morning, when their phones finally switched off Do Not Disturb mode at 7 a.m. By the time my parents arrived at the hospital, I was already out of surgery and recovering. I had received the emotional support I needed from my grandparents, but I felt like my parents had failed me. Despite knowing about their phone policy, it hurt deeply to realize they weren't there when I needed them the most. From that day, I struggled to see them as the amazing parents I had once known, feeling a profound sense of abandonment and disappointment. Since the accident, I've distanced myself from my parents. I avoided their offers to take me to physical therapy sessions or doctor's appointments, relying solely on my grandparents instead. I even made the decision to go no contact with them recently after I saved enough to move out of their house. My grandparents and parents have both expressed their disappointment, insisting that I'm being too harsh and ungrateful, considering everything my parents have done for me in the past. My parents have apologized repeatedly for not being there that night. They've told me they deeply regret their decision to use the Do Not Disturb mode and have since vowed to keep their phones accessible at all hours. I know from my siblings that my parents now answer calls from them at any time of night, even past 10 p.m. But despite their sincere apologies and changed behavior, I can't shake the hurt I felt that night. That single moment has overshadowed all the good memories I had of them, and I'm not sure if I can ever forgive them for making me feel so abandoned. While I hate disappointing my grandparents, who are saddened by my refusal to reconcile, I can't ignore the feelings of abandonment that linger from that night. The thought of moving on and forgiving them feels insurmountable, even though everyone around me seems to believe I'm overreacting. So here I am, questioning my stance and wondering if I'm being unreasonable. AITA, edit. I'm honestly overwhelmed by how much attention this post has received, and I wanted to clarify a few things based on questions some of you raised. Many of you asked why my grandparents didn't simply go to my parents' house and wake them up in person. They felt they needed to stay at the hospital with me, given my serious condition and the fact that my parents couldn't be reached for 6 hours. They believed their priority was to be present with me during those crucial hours. To clarify the severity of my injuries, I was in a critical enough condition that I kept drifting in and out of consciousness. I wasn't able to make medical decisions for myself, so my grandparents were the ones speaking to the medical staff and advocating on my behalf. Without them, I would have been alone and unable to communicate with the doctors effectively. Others wondered why I didn't just call my siblings, or why no one else in the family tried to involve them. The truth is, my siblings were simply too young to help. I am the oldest of 4, with an 8-year gap between me and my nearest sibling, who was 10 years old at the time. My other siblings were only 5 years old and 11 months old, respectively. It would have been too much for a 10-year-old to handle, not to mention how traumatizing it might have been for them to learn that their older sibling was critically injured in a hospital. I hope this additional context provides some clarity. Thank you for all your insights. Don't you hate when your girlfriend is always late and snaps at you for rushing her? I took sweet revenge, booked tickets for her favorite artist, and let her waste time doing makeup and taking photos while I laughed inside. When we reached, her favorite artist's performance was already over. She cried throughout the event. AITA. My wife, 32F, and I, 31M, have been together for 5 years, and I'm beyond frustrated with her chronic lateness. It's become an exhausting routine, one she never seems to take seriously. She's often late because she spends ages taking photos. She's a budding content creator with a decent Instagram following, so nearly every outing becomes a mini photo shoot. At this point, I've stopped even trying to take pictures for her because of how tiring it's become. To get to events on time, I've resorted to telling her they start 45 minutes earlier than they actually do. She's never realized this trick because she's so caught up in her routine. But no matter how many conversations we've had about this, nothing has changed, and I'm the one constantly stressed, staying on top of our schedules. This month alone, we've been late to 2 major events, and I'm reaching my breaking point. So, a week ago, I told her that I wouldn't be giving her a fake time buffer anymore. I expected her to be an adult, plan accordingly, and be responsible. Last weekend was her birthday, and I got tickets to an event she'd been excited about. Several artists were performing, and her favorite act was first. I didn't give her the extra 40-minute cushion as I normally would, thinking she'd remember our talk and take it to heart. But as usual, she fell into her influencer routine, setting up lights, decorating, dressing up, and spending over an hour on photos. Knowing her favorite artist would be on stage while she was still at home, I felt a strange irony in just letting it happen, exhausted from always being the one to manage our time. When we finally arrived, she realized we'd missed the first act. She was crushed, started crying, and confronted me, asking why I'd let this happen on her birthday of all days. She accused me of getting a kick out of it, and asked why I couldn't set my ego aside just once. I told her this was on her. I'd told her I wasn't going to rush her anymore, and she should have taken it seriously. She was heartbroken, saying that her main reason for going was to see that artist, who we'd missed. She cried off and on throughout the rest of the event, and the car ride home was painfully quiet. When we got back, she texted me, saying I wasn't welcome in the bedroom that night. Ignoring her message, I went in while she was changing, and she gave me a look that could kill. I told her calmly that her not welcome statement was irrelevant, as it's my room too. If she felt uncomfortable, she could take the couch. She ended up leaving to stay with her mom. Now, I'm wondering if I really handled it right and if I've taken things too far. So, AITAH. My son died in a car accident, and during the funeral, my ex had the audacity to demand my dead son's savings for her stepson. I told her no. I'll go to Belgium and drink beer with the money, just like I promised my son. AITA. My son was incredibly smart. Smarter than me, honestly. Sometimes I even joked about needing a paternity test because he was so damn intelligent. After his mom and I divorced when he was around 12, she remarried when he was 14, and I remarried when he was 16. I'd set up an RESP for him. It's an education savings plan here in Canada. As long as he went to post-secondary, he could use the money for whatever he wanted. I always told him, jokingly, that if he chose not to go to university, I'd take the money and head to Belgium to buy beer from the monks there, the kind where they only let you buy one case. He always played along, knew it was just a joke, and he'd never let me rile him up over it. When he got accepted to McGill, it was the proudest moment of my life. We even went out for a beer to celebrate, and I mourned my missed Europe trip. Then, tragically, he was struck and killed by a drunk driver in March. It's been a struggle for everyone. My ex and I are both dealing with it in our own ways, and my wife has been my absolute rock through this whole thing. While I was handling the funeral and everything else, my ex came to me and brought up his RESP. Since he'd gotten a scholarship, he was only planning to use the money for living expenses and an emergency fund. She asked what I was planning to do with it. I told her I was going to stick to what I'd always joked about: go to Europe to drink beer. She then asked if I'd consider giving it to her stepson instead. I thought it over and said no. Her husband is a decent guy, but he made it clear he wasn't going to take on any extra expenses for my son beyond basics like food and shelter. So, I told her I wouldn't be giving the money to her stepson and was going to drink beer in my son's honor instead. She says I'm being wasteful and irresponsible, and yeah, maybe I am. I'll have to return the government's portion of the RESP, but honestly, I don't care. My ex thinks I'm being foolish, wasting money meant for our son. But I don't care. My son would have laughed his ass off if he knew I actually went through with it.